careful, Teresa. That elite was an ultra.
Today we're going to talk about something that a lot of people get hung up on, and that is this history of Joseph Smith. Whether or not he was some sort of magician, if he was involved in the dark arts. Joseph Smith, Gryffindor confirmed? Slytherin confirmed? So, Bushman, Rough Stone Rolling. I've actually never read it, and I never will. I have no interest in reading Rough Stone Rolling, but I have read D. Michael Quinn's book, Mormonism and the Magic Worldview, which he himself admits that a lot of what he talks about is a bit of a stretch, but he's just trying to make a point. I definitely think it's worth thinking about, but I do think that it is dangerous. I think it is very dangerous to allow our founding myths, and I don't use that in a derogatory sense, but like our founding story, it's dangerous to allow that to be redefined, because the ability to redefine something as fundamental as a founding myth can be catastrophic. This is why I think that in the temple we talk about the founding myth, because it has been redefined at some point prior in history. You know, Joseph Smith in the King Follett Discourse, he talks about how the first line of the Bible was changed by some old guy who lived a long time ago, one of these Hebrews, right? And he says if you start wrong, you end wrong. And so the ability to change the story of the restoration is an incredibly powerful tool. If I was trying to undermine the gospel, that would be the place to attack. And that's what we've seen that this strategy is. And it's been tale as old as time since Fawn Brodie, who thinks that Joseph Smith is a con man. She couldn't explain how he did everything that he did. So basically she just says, oh, he has the ability to hypnotize people, but he doesn't know it. And he can hypnotize multiple people at the same time. And they can all see the same thing and go to their graves swearing they saw it. And it's like, geez, what is he, CIA trained? Anyway. But yeah, Bushman, he's made big waves in the church, and we've since created this book called Saints, which is like a 50-50 split between the traditional history and the Bushman history. Yeah, I don't really like pop history very much. I think it's very dangerous. I think the only thing that's more dangerous than pop history is historical fiction. Don't read historical fiction unless it's for fun. But it's no better than reading Dungeons and Dragons or something, okay? And yeah, Saints, I read the first one. It's pretty good. It's fun to read. But if you want to really read some cool history, you should check out Drew Briney's book. I think it's JSDI 2. And it's just every account ever, or he's tried to at least accumulate all the accounts ever about stuff Joseph Smith taught or said. He won't even tell you if it's like a doctrine or an insight. That's why it's called Joseph Smith Doctrines and Insights, right? It's very interesting because he kind of just throws it all at you like this big encyclopedia, and you get to make the decisions as to whether or not you believe in the Quaker Moon Men or not. I know that Drew Briney doesn't. I don't think I do either, but it's there for all to read. But yeah, these Harvard-trained historians like Bushman, we got to be careful because the Joseph Smith Foundation, just they talk about kind of his history and how he's like not our guy, so to speak. When I heard that, I was like, huh, that's interesting. So I went and looked up kind of his educational background and his mentors, and what would you know? What would you know? It's the usual suspects. It's these guys who are trying to redefine, you know, the history of the American Revolution. What was it that inspired the revolution? Here's a 1 billion-page volume that doesn't mention the Bible. Or there's like another one that's like about civil rights or how America's a nation of immigrants, you know, like the whole Statue of Liberty placard, that sort of mentality. Redefining what the Puritans came here for, or what all these people fleeing Europe, what they came here to establish, you know. We're going to redefine that, redefine the founding myth of America. That's their goal. And do you know who else is a Harvard-trained historian? This is a funny side note, but I think it's the first nonfiction book I ever read. I read it in like middle school or, I don't know, 9th grade, 10th grade, something like that. But it is Guns, Germs, and Steel. And I read it because I thought that the title was really cool, and there's like a cool picture of Pizarro or something. I'd never read a lot of nonfiction before, so there weren't any red flags. But now that I go back and look at it, the margins are like oddly big, the font's really big. There's no sources cited anywhere in the book, anywhere. There's a bibliography in the back, and if you wanted to really confirm any one of his, like every single one of his claims, it would take you forever. You wouldn't be able to do it. You couldn't verify anything. He hasn't done the work, or he's concealed it. And that's a Pulitzer Prize winning book, right? Award winning, to just go on almost like a YouTube monologue, just for 1,000 pages, without any sort of evidence. And you're getting awards, Harvard trained. And so that's the kind of people that we're dealing with, the Guns, Germs, and Steel. The whole point of the book is just to say that the only reason why certain civilizations rose and others fell is because of happenstance and thievery. I just think it's a really negative message, and it's obviously very politically motivated. Those are some thoughts about the Harvard historian. So what's this deal about magic? People overreact a little bit. I think we've seen a few too many of these scary movies. We kind of get the wrong idea about these sorts of things, like this folk magic or whatever. I don't think it's what people make it out to be. I think people worry about it too much. But there's like this website where this guy's like going on. He's like, there's upside down pentagrams on the church or on the temple. There's sunstones, there's moonstones. And it's like, guy, okay, calm down. The upside down stars and stuff, these are ancient symbols. They have good origins. They keep getting flipped back and forth, and now both of them are like satanic. But one of them is good, and one of them is bad. And the one that is good is the one that is on the temple, okay? So the point is that even if Joseph Smith was involved in this stuff or did believe in like astrology, that doesn't mean that he doesn't believe in God or something. Jesus Christ, he would put mud on people's eyes and he would make them see, and he'd do all these sorts of magic spells on people to heal them. And he was called a magician, sometimes in a favorable context and other times in bad context, He's called a miracle worker, that sort of thing. So I think just because we use the word magician or magic, we're kind of programmed to have this negative idea about it, and that's just Hollywood in your brain talking, okay? What can we know about this magic stuff? There's an interesting book about astrology, and it's from like the 1600s. It's called William Lilly's Introduction to Astrology, but it was republished in 1860, which is, the time period that we are looking for. And the intro is written by this guy who goes by the pseudonym Zadkiel. And if you read it, I'm not going to read the whole thing because it'll take too long. But it's almost like this Moroni's promise thing. He's like, you need to try this. I didn't believe in it, but then when I tried it, there is some truth here, and that's why I'm republishing this book, is because I think that there's some valuable truth here, and everyone is laughing at it, but I believe in God, and astrology is not forbidden by the Bible. And he just strikes me as like a very, very deeply religious person, like very Christian person who believes in God, and he also happens to believe in astrology. He's from the time period, so even if 1% of what D. Michael Quinn says in his book is true about all these astrological dates lining up, it doesn't mean that somehow that means that Joseph Smith is like a Satan worshiper or something. Like that's crazy. Like he's still super religious, okay? He's still a good person. He's still really worried about the truth. He's not a kook. Okay, this Zadkiel guy, I don't know anything about him other than just reading this preface, but he just talks a lot about God, and he closes it with this. He says, I am contented, with God's blessing, to give up the ghost in the firm persuasion that in maintaining what I believe is the truth in this respect, I shall meet hereafter, through the goodness of God and the merits of my Savior, with a merciful judgment. I am, reader, your devoted friend and well-wisher in all science, which may honor God and benefit mankind. Zadkiel. And, that's astrology. And we don't really think about the stars very often, unless we're discussing our matching ankle tattoos, right? We don't discuss the stars very often anymore. Basically, since academia took over the world, the idea of what's considered respectable and what's not has totally been tightened down. And if you go to the American Cancer Society's website where they talk about the origin of cancer, this is just, when I read this, I laughed myself to sleep or to death or something. Pretend that was funnier than it was. But let's see, what does it say here? It says, Hippocrates used the terms carcinos and carcinoma to describe non-ulcer-forming and ulcer-forming tumors. In Greek, these words refer to a crab, most likely applied to the disease because the finger-like spreading projections of the cancer called to mind the shape of the crab. Oh my gosh. He was inspecting the physical evidence with his eyes and his microscope, and he didn't believe in anything metaphysical, but he saw the tumors which were physical, and he said, these look like a crab, which is also physical. I'm going to call it cancer. That's such a good idea. And it's like, that is the most insane thing I've ever read in my life. And it's on the American Cancer Society's website. Hippocrates, the Greek guy, You think that he thought cancer had something to do with crabs on the beach? It looked like it. That's why he called it cancer. I don't even have to look this up, but the man certainly believed that where cancer is in the sky will affect how the body needs to be treated, like the astrological sign in the sky. And when we're talking about astrology, we're not talking about like girls discussing like which month they were born. Like, this is real astrology, which is totally different than like the pop astrology. Hippocrates, he definitely believed that the stars had something to do with the body and its healing and what caused diseases. I can't remember exactly what it says in the William Lilly book, but the whole reason that I found that book is because I was trying to learn about the word cancer, and it has to do with the stomach and like diseases of the stomach or something like that. And so, yeah, I don't know what Hippocrates thought about the stars, okay? I'm not an expert in astrology. I don't know anything about it. But to him, it was a real science that really made sense. And it wasn't because he was a crackpot. It was because he had a different framework for viewing the world and understanding the world. So yeah, Hippocrates, that's insane to think that he's like a normal doctor today. The guy had a telescope or something, like he's making sure the stars are in the right place before he removes your tooth or whatever. You know, geometry, this Pythagorean theorem, you know, I don't think that Pythagoras created the Pythagorean theorem so that you could learn about it in 6th grade math. You know, he didn't do it so that school teachers could teach students about triangles. Then there's like this salamander letter thing. You know, the salamander letter was a good forgery. And it's not just because the Hoffman guy cut the pages out of the Special Collections Library at USU and wrote them on that. It's not just because of the physical paper, it's also because of the content. The idea of this white salamander, I mean, if you read like Manly P. Hall, I mean, I haven't read the whole book. I did like a search for salamanders, and salamanders, they're viewed in like a positive light. They're messengers. They're good messengers, almost always. The salamander is a good messenger. And there is an account of Joseph Smith like encountering a toad or something, and you don't have to believe it if you don't want. But a toad is a malevolent creature, you know, it's associated with evil. But a salamander is good and benevolent. So Hoffman, since there is this account of a toad, as someone said something about a toad at one point, and then it's like, well, that doesn't really make sense because toads are evil. Well, he made it a salamander so that it was more believable. But it's also something that's very shocking, you know, the white salamander. So, point is, I think we can believe our ancestors. I listened to this guy. He was on this Catholic podcast, and he had left the church, and he was just giving this big sob story about every single one of his ancestors are so stupid, and they all got conned by this tricky guy, this tricky magician guy, with his, quote, treasure-seeking greed. That's a Richard Bushman line. Bushman's a concern troll. But yeah, all of his ancestors, they were duped by these con men, and then the dupe went so far that they weren't just duped out of their property, they were duped into these polygamous marriages, of which he, the person on the podcast, is the product of. And so his entire genetic code is the product of a scam. This is what he's telling me with a straight face. My entire genetic sequence is the product of a scam. And yet, with my galaxy brain that I have inherited from my ancestors, who were all stupid, I have deduced the truth by reading the first 6 pages of the CES letter. And then I realized, you know, that medical marijuana sounds really good. And I'm mixing up his story with the story of some friends, but that's the point, okay? You ever seen the movie Idiocracy? It's kind of like a horror movie. It was intended as a comedy, and this guy, John or whatever his name is, he gets teleported to the future, and in the past he's an idiot, but in the future he's like a super genius because only the dumb people had children. No one is able to solve the problems. They can't save the world because they're using Gatorade to grow the crops and it's killing everything, you know. It's pretty funny. But if you're the Frito guy, you know, Frito is his friend's name in the movie. Frito, he didn't solve the Gatorade conspiracy, okay? It was the guy who had actual ancestors who had actual brains. If you're the product of a scam, maybe you should just cut the Ethernet cable out of the ground that goes to your house. Just make sure you don't listen to anyone because you're going to get conned again, okay? So please be careful. And you just got to trust your ancestors. I don't think they were all idiots. I don't think they were duped. Not all of them saw the world the way I do. It doesn't mean they're stupid. I think that they trusted Joseph Smith. They knew what they saw. And they had more access to more historical evidence than any Harvard-trained historian ever will, you know, like because they were there, okay? Like, I'm descended from the brother-in-law of Newell Knight, and they were there with the prophet. Like, there's D&C scriptures that are written about them, and they were there when they were written. And maybe they didn't write down everything that they saw the minute they saw it into a document that was preserved and made sure that it didn't get contaminated so that it's, quote, reliable evidence. Maybe that didn't happen. But they had children. Like, Anna Smith had children. Or sorry, not Anna Smith. Anna Knight had children. And those children had children. That's a testimony that a Harvard-trained historian doesn't care about. Not reliable. Well, it's reliable to me because they're my ancestors. Okay? If you've ever spent any amount of time in public with someone with a disability, you'll quickly realize that being with someone like that around all these people who are not acquainted, like they're uncomfortable or whatever, you can really see the good people come shining through. If you get stuck in a doorway or something like that, they want to come help. And they do it very tactfully, in a very charismatic, like, genuine way, and it's not irritating at all. These people, they come out of the crowd and they're just shining, these noble and great ones, right? It's really interesting. And it doesn't happen when you're just a normal guy by yourself. No one cares. You know, you start getting tagged by Walmart security. They're like, oh, single man. There's a man in the house and he's wearing a hoodie. Watch out. You know, so depending on who you're with, people treat you different. You can see people's character based on how they interact with strangers who have, like, a lot of health problems, I guess. When you go to the museum, there's a museum, church history museum, and they have a cane. It was a cane that was owned by Joseph Smith. You know, Joseph Smith, he had a limp, so he walked with a cane. There's the story of how he gave it to Joseph Knight, who is my ancestor. And basically, Joseph Knight, he was shuffling down the street. Joseph Smith walked with him. He rushed to his aid. He gave him his stick, or his walking stick. And he says, "You need it more than I do." And his family kept it for a very long time. There's blessings given by Joseph Smith to Joseph Knight, blessing his tortured and trembling body. The way that he treated my ancestors and my experiences with the way people treat others in this world today, it really just hit me so hard that Joseph Smith was a good person and he cared about my ancestors. And I don't think they were so stupid to get duped, and they trusted him. So I will trust him. And no Harvard-trained historian will accept that as good, reliable, quote-unquote reliable evidence. But it is reliable to me because the breath that I am taking right now, the blood in my veins, my DNA, all these things, it is a historical document. It is a testimony that was born of those who followed the prophet. And, you know, if you aren't descended from pioneers, that's okay. I'm not saying that your testimony is less. If your patriarchal blessing says that you're from the tribe of Ephraim, then you're from the tribe of Ephraim. And I'm not trying to diminish you in that regard, but if you are descended from these people, I think that you are a historical document. And if you trust yourself, then trust yourself. Don Bradley, he has some interesting ideas about this translation process, where he talks about where they put up the little curtain between Joseph Smith and they like cover the plates, and he calls out the words through the veil while he looks through the Nephite interpreters. You know, he looks at the Urim and Thummim, and this is a mini tabernacle that they're setting up, because that's how it worked in the tabernacle, that the priest, he would look at the stones on the Urim and Thummim, which, according to Josephus, they used to glitter, but then they stopped. Josephus, the ancient historian. But then they stopped after the temple was destroyed, perhaps after the priesthood was taken away from Judah, or whatever, the tribes, you know, the kingdom of Judea. And then he also talks about the hat, and the hat is also a mini tabernacle, because the tabernacle was created out of animal skins to keep out the light, so that they could see the stones glitter in the Urim and Thummim. And he says that the hat thing, which it is like a mini tabernacle, because the hat was made out of animal skins, and he's holding out the light. And I think that Joseph Smith understood this and understood what he was trying to do. I don't think it wasn't like a Ouija board to him, okay? Like, that's ridiculous. I don't think that Joseph Smith was trying to talk to spirits or whatever, and he's like, oh, he's like a greedy, it's treasure-seeking greed. Oh, gosh. This totally betrays his character. What young boy doesn't think about treasure? You know, doesn't think about having a Lamborghini? Who doesn't think about that? About having a nice car, big house, becoming a billionaire? We've all thought about it, especially when we're young. You can frame things however you want. You can say Joseph Smith, he's just a con man, money digger, and he was like into witchcraft, and he's like basically a Satanist, so you're all stupid. your ancestors are so stupid and they basically had no frontal lobe and no eyeballs, and they're basically just these little worms that got enchanted by the Pied Piper or the rats or whatever, and he marched them around and cleaned them out for every dollar that they had. And I just can't believe it. And maybe the magic stuff is totally wrong. Maybe it's a lie to just totally destroy the foundations of our faith. Maybe it's a really good lie. Or maybe it's true and we're just viewing it in the wrong light. Because you can say, there was a young boy who dreamed of treasure, and by mistake he contacted a treasure guardian named Moroni, and he became the greatest prophet who ever lived. And he was told by this spirit to not give in to greed, and he didn't. And he became the greatest prophet who ever lived. You can frame it differently. That's the point, is Joseph Smith is awesome. There's a lot of people who are trying to redefine our founding myths, and I don't mean founding myth in that it's fake, but just the story we tell ourselves that gives our existence and our life meaning. And when you allow someone to redefine that on their terms, they can undermine your faith. And so be very, very cognizant or aware of that's going on. And it's not just going on with the history of the church, but these Harvard historians, they're going after the founding of the nation. They're going after all the wars and why they were fought and everything. They want to paint a narrative that is different than what your ancestors believed about the founding of the country and what this country is for, what the purpose of the church was. Just be aware, keep your eyes open. That's your lesson for today. Stay faithful. Have a good one.